Great, Gabe. An agent drops off contract to the great Rattikin Title. What happens then?
Well, what we do is we take the order and we enter it into our computer system. And it's very important that we have full buyer names and full seller names and the correct address and legal description on the contract, because we search the property not only by its legal description, property address, but we also search the chain of names in the title.
Yeah. So when you're saying an order, basically what an order means, I know that's an industry term, but
Yes.
an order basically means is that a agent or an individual has brought you a contract on a home that is under contract, and then the process begins as far as getting it from that point to the closing. Would that be correct?
That would be correct.
All right. Let me ask you a question. A lot of people think that they have to have earnest money to have a contract. You don't have to have earnest money to have a contract. The earnest money is there in case somebody basically defaults on the contract or doesn't perform. Is that correct?
Yes, but a lot of attorneys will tell you that in order for a seller to take their house off the market, there has to be some consideration.
Right.
And so the earnest money is, I guess, the consideration in the contract. And so usually we see earnest money checks that are somewhere around 1% of the sales price.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Just give me a little overlay of the process here. You've got it, you've submitted a contract, you open your order, what do you do next?
Well, we start communicating with the buyer, the seller, and the lender. The first thing we do after the order has been, the contract, in other words, has been turned into our computer system and our title plant starts their search, we send out some information sheets to both the buyer and seller so that we can gather their more extensive personal data to process the file.
Right.
And then once the title work is ready, we issue what's called a title commitment to the parties in the transaction. We typically issue them to the buyer, the seller, the two realtors, and the lender. That comes with copies of a tax certificate that shows the current status on taxes. And then we will also furnish copies of the documents that appear on Schedules B and C of the title commitment.
Okay, let me ask this. Most people are only familiar with title insurance because that's what they see on the contract.
Right.
So why don't you explain a little bit about what title insurance does and et cetera?
Okay, the title commitment that we issue to everybody is a preview to the actual final title policy that the buyer will receive after closing and funding. The title insurance policy covers the buyer for the time of closing backwards. Title insurance is a retrospective type of insurance, and so if anything should crop up while the buyer is enjoying their home ownership, such as an unpaid lien, back taxes, a lost heir that didn't perhaps be put in the loop when the property was being sold, that's what the title policy is going to protect the buyer against.
So basically the way I've always explained it is, let's say that something was inadvertently missed during the title search, or in theory was filed at the last second before a closing by another party that wouldn't necessarily have made it through the system, then a buyer would be covered on that from a future liability standpoint.
Yes, the buyer would be covered on that, and the title company will pursue all remedies to make that right.
Right. Good.
With the person, because sometimes we run into situations where people have rushed us to close when they knew good full and well that they had a pending federal tax lien that was going to hit any day now. In fact, I had to shut down a transaction one time for a brief period of time to get that rectified.
So I think what you're saying is that in theory not every party to the transaction is always on the up and up, meaning on the potentially from the seller side.
That is correct, unfortunately.
Small percentage, but does happen.
Yes, our world has changed a lot. Nearly 30 years ago when I started in this business, I didn't have to think or talk or examine things as thoroughly as I do today. And the world has just changed a lot. I think with technology and all the lawyer shows of the 80s, a lot of people have tried to become armchair lawyers and have filed their own documents that they've downloaded off the internet. And a lot of times what that does is it just clouds the title. So we deal with things today we didn't 30 years ago.
Explain a cloud to the title.
Okay, so if I have a situation right now where the seller on the property is a couple, and actually the husband is deceased, and he was living in a nursing home in Houston, and apparently there were some outstanding bills owed to the nursing home. Well, the attorney for the nursing home tried to file a probate proceeding on this man's behalf, and now he's clouded the title. So the poor seller wife has had to hire her attorney here to try to clear that up. So sometimes if someone doesn't pay a bill to like a creditor, the creditor will put a judgment against that person, and that's called a cloud on the title.
Right, so it's actually not on the home, but it's really on the person's name / social security number. So when they go to sell the home, it cannot force them to sell the home, but when they go to sell the home, then they have to deal with it.
They have to deal with it, yes. And then sometimes there can be like some issues if a seller didn't pay a contractor. They can go to the small claims court and get a mechanics and materialman's lien and put that on the property.
So for argument's sake, if somebody had, which we have a lot around here, roof replacements due to hailstorms,
yes.
And let's say somebody was unhappy with the quality of the work
yes.
that they had, they said, well, I'm not going to pay him, or I'm not going to pay him everything. When they go to sell, they might find out that XYZ Roofing actually has a lien on the house that they were not aware of. And again, that lien cannot, well, actually a mechanics lien potentially could force a foreclosure, couldn't it? I mean, in theory.
Generally, we don't really see people foreclosing on a mechanics lien.
No, but in theory.
I think it would be hard to argue.
Okay.
It would be that'd be a judge decision.
Okay.
And I think that would probably be a hard thing to argue, but
Right.
I guess anything is possible.
Okay, all right, very good. So so the main title objections that you would have potentially would be a unforeseen lien that somebody, was not aware of, meaning
Correct.
as we talked about a creditor. It could be a probate situation where maybe there is a disgruntled person somewhere in the chain. Or if there's not a probate and we're having to do heirship affidavit where the kin or the kids, there could be some potential fights there too, right?
Oh, absolutely. I've run into a few in my day.
Okay. Well, I say good, not good for them.
Not good for me either. We don't like fights in our lobby.
No, that's not good. So, talk about the closing statements a little bit. So when somebody's at the end, basically prior to, an agent has gone through a contract with somebody, basically gone through an estimate of closing costs, and indicated them gone through approximately the fees, especially on the seller side, and said this is basically what you're going to net. There's been a lot of changes to those documents here in the last few years, has it not?
There have been, like October of 2015 is when everything changed in our industry. The consumer advocate group called the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau came along. That was part of the Frank Dodd Act, which resulted from the mortgage crisis we had around 2008.
Right?
Yep. This Consumer Finance Protection Bureau was formulated in our government, and they decided that the prior forms that were used were not clear to the consumer. We had a form back then called the Truth in Lending, which was confusing to some because it talked about the interest rate and the APR on the same page. So what they tried to do with the CFPB is combine the Truth in Lending along with the settlement statement and make it a more user-friendly document for the consumer.
Do you think it's more user-friendly?
Honestly, I'm rather old school, so I like the old documents better. But from a title company's standpoint, it hasn't been too bad of a transition, but I do think it's a lot of information in one document for the buyer especially.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it was, on the seller side, it was always very simple. This is what you're going to do. It's just getting a little more complicated when you're trying to explain it to someone who's not in the industry.
Exactly.
That kind of thing.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that whenever you're getting a loan on a home, you have to get a survey, which is where either an existing one or a new one, where a engineer has gone out and basically, or a surveyor I should say, has gone out and surveyed the property, basically to make sure that your home is built on your piece of property and not on the neighbor's property, or any additions that have been done, or et cetera. So what would you say your main issues that you would see with survey issues? And I say that because if you have a real survey issue, you can't move forward with your contract until that's resolved, so.
Right, well, the lender is gonna want the survey to be the actual depiction of what is on the ground. And so does the title company. We need it to be accurate. And so, 30 years ago, it was always a buyer's expense to get a new survey, and it wasn't really questioned by anybody. But probably about 15 years ago, the contracts changed to where surveys are reusable. So the main issue we have with reusable surveys is their legibility. A lot of times they roll in and they're not very legible. And then sometimes, like recently, I had someone present a survey to me to use that was like 50 years old. And in 50 years, there's going to be some changes to the property.
Sure, or potentially some new, recorded easements.
Yes,
or whatever.
exactly.
Now, it needs to have a seal on the survey?
There are several things it has to have.
Okay.
The seal is one of them.
Yeah.
It's got to have the surveyor's signature.
Right.
It needs a directional arrow.
Right.
All the improvements need to be on the survey. All the easements, building lines have to be shown. The legal description has to be on there and be correct.
Right.
We have to have it. The survey really needs to be certified by the surveyor, saying that this is what he found on the ground. And then also, a lot of underwriters want to see, if we're using an old survey, that it was used by another lender and title company in the past, and that it was certified to them.
Right.
So the survey has to be dated, of course. I think that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Okay. So, a lot of times we have what we refer to as domino transactions, where Mr. and Mrs. Smith, they're buying house B is buying C, D, E. So, in my opinion, it's always been important, if we can, to have as many of those title transactions going on at the same title company, because people don't understand that even though they bring a cashier's check, or their loan lender wires money to the title company, that once that all funds, meaning it's a done transaction, you guys are not issuing cashier's checks. You are issuing, they're good funds, but they're still title company funds. So in other words, if you're closing in another title company, you're having to close that afternoon, your transaction may get held up because that money still has to clear, right?
That is correct. So a title company check is just a company check. It's not, like a cashier's check. We're not a bank, so we can't issue a cashier's check. And when you try to wire from one title company to the other, there are wire cutoff times and all other kinds of pitfalls. So yeah, it does make a lot of sense to keep the transactions when there's a domino effect all at the one company, because it's real easy for a title company to move funds from one file to the next.
Right, and I think that's great. One thing that I always find that's a problem in certain transactions and is a communications issue. And that doesn't mean from the title company. It could be that one of the seller or the buyer aren't cooperating and communicating. The lender isn't cooperating and communicating, or some other things. So it's really important to keep everybody informed. And if there is an issue, I know you guys are great about letting everybody know ahead of time, right away type of thing. So
as soon as we get the title work, we look at it, and if there's an issue, we try to let everybody know right away.
Right.
And sometimes being the messenger is not always the funnest, because we have to sometimes deliver some information that is a challenging piece of information, or something that we're going to have to work through, where everybody wants everything just to be easy and smooth.
Right.
And it's not always that way, but like you say, Mike, communication is the key.
And I find that the title companies are really good about continuing education. I mean, if there's a change in the industry, even if it's not coming for 6 months or a year, you guys want to get that information out ahead of time, so we, as an industry, know how to work with it.
Yes, that's exactly right, because when the CFPB was coming down the pipe,
for people, explain
Consumer Finance Protection Bureau,
all right.
When that was, had come about, and they were telling us that we were going to get all new documents, there would be new rules. In fact, we're supposed to get the settlement statement, which is called the closing disclosure now, 3 days prior to closing from the lender, so that we could send it out to everybody. And we thought we were going to get documents 3 days prior to closing. It hadn't really shaken out that way, but we do get them in advance. And the thing is, with those closing disclosures, we do have to go back and forth with the lender to get them just right.
Right, and then it's extremely important that the agents involved, or if it's not, there's no agents, just individuals who decided to handle this, that they really have to stay on top of that, because if the lender doesn't have those disclosures 3 days prior to, you're not closing on your closing date. Especially if they're backing up on one another.
Well, and what we find is that sometimes the lenders will send like a kind of a bogus or a preliminary closing disclosure out to the buyer just to start the 3 days ticking.
Right.
And so at first when the CFPB or the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau was coming about, we thought we would have everything 3 days in advance to send to the buyer. But that's really not the case, because sometimes the lender will send the preliminary closing disclosure out to the buyer and they don't even have loan approval yet. So it's real important
just trying to skirt it.
Yeah, they're just trying to meet that deadline.
Right.
But you know, sometimes they haven't been able to, because I think the lenders have a lot more hoops to jump through now than they used to.
Oh, everybody does.
Yeah.
So is there something coming down the pipe, so to speak, that is a big change in your industry, or is it going to be kind of status quo for a while here?
Well, what we've heard is everything's kind of will be status quo for a while, but then we've heard that President Trump wants to repeal the CFPB, but I don't think that that'll happen.
Got it. In theory, if it did, then they wouldn't necessarily have to have those docs 3 days right before, which is what we were just discussing.
Right.
Okay.
And part of the reason they did that 3-day thing is because before, buyers would not get anything, and they would get an estimate early, but they wouldn't get anything 3 days prior, and then they'd show up at the closing table sometimes because the papers were landed at the title company 30 minutes before closing, and their numbers were way off.
Right.
So this was a way to maybe fix that.
The main thing, the good side of it, when the intent of it was to get rid of predatory lending, which
Correct.
That type of thing. So.
And I think it has probably weeded out some.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We don't see as many, transactions, falling apart, what I refer to as the bunny slipper lender, meaning some guy who works out of his house and wherever and never gets out of his pajamas, that type of
Exactly,
situation. So I would agree with you from that standpoint. So, all right. Well, in closing, we appreciate you taking the time to be with us.
My pleasure.
We'll have Gay's contact information, email here on the YouTube link. So again, if you need help, obviously we're going to get you with Gay, but if for some reason you're doing something on your own and just have a title question, please reach out to Gay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike.